A powerful land developer sent his men into a quiet mountain town to frighten an elderly couple into signing away their farm. They thought age meant weakness. They thought fear would be enough. When they shattered windows and raised their hands, they believed the land was already theirs. But they made two fatal mistakes. They didn't know the young man living in the nearby cabin was a Navy SEAL who had seen far worse than threats. And they didn't know the silent shadow at his side was a fully trained German Shepherd K9 waiting for a single command. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Autumn arrived early in Sierra Grove, California, settling over the mountain town like a quiet promise. The air carried a steady chill, sharp with the scent of pine sap and damp earth. Gold and rust-colored leaves drifted down from towering conifers, lining the narrow roads that wound between cabins and forgotten orchards. Morning fog clung low to the ground, dissolving slowly as pale sunlight filtered through the trees. Sierra Grove was the kind of place people came to disappear, not to be found. That was exactly why Evan Mercer had chosen it. Evan was a young Navy SEAL, tall and athletic, with the easy strength of a man forged through discipline rather than vanity. His dark hair was kept short out of habit, his jaw clean-shaven, his features sharp yet calm. People often noticed his looks before they noticed his eyes. Steel gray, alert even when his body appeared relaxed. Those eyes had seen too much sand, too much fire, too many faces that never came home. Officially, he was on leave. In truth, he was recovering from a mission that had ended successfully on paper and catastrophically inside his head. He rented a small wooden cabin just beyond the town's edge, tucked against the forest like it was trying to hide. The place was simple: one bedroom, a stone hearth, creaking floorboards, and windows that looked out into endless trees. No cell service, no neighbors close enough to ask questions. Only Ranger. Ranger was a German Shepherd K9, massive and powerful, his black and tan coat thick and perfectly suited for mountain weather. He moved with disciplined grace, every step controlled, every sound measured. His ears stood tall, constantly adjusting to the forest's whispers. Ranger was not a pet. He was Evan's partner, trained for combat, detection, and protection. Where Evan carried scars on the inside, Ranger carried purpose in every breath. That first evening, Evan unpacked slowly, methodically. He cleaned his gear out of habit, wiped down surfaces that were already clean, and stacked firewood by the hearth. Ranger lay near the door, body relaxed, but eyes tracking shadows outside the window. Twice he rose and paced the room, nose lifted, testing the air. "You smell something?" Evan asked quietly. Ranger didn't answer, but his low, almost inaudible huff was enough. Evan dismissed it as wildlife, deer, foxes, maybe a black bear moving through the trees. Still, when night fell and the wind whispered through the branches, Evan slept lightly. The next afternoon, under a sky brushed pale blue and gold, Evan took Ranger for a walk along a dirt path leading past an old apple orchard. That was where he met Walter and June Whitmore. Walter Whitmore was a thin, stooped man in his late 70s, with weathered hands and a face lined by decades of mountain sun. His gray hair was neatly combed, his flannel shirt faded from years of honest wear. June, his wife, walked beside him, shorter and softer in frame, with silver hair, pulled into a loose bun and kind eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with quiet strength, the kind born from enduring loss without bitterness. They greeted Evan warmly, surprised but not wary. "You must be the young man renting the Carter cabin," June said with a gentle smile. "We don't get many visitors this time of year." Walter held out a red apple, freshly picked, its skin imperfect but vibrant. "From our trees. Best thing autumn ever gave us." Evan accepted, thanked them, and took a bite. The apple was crisp and sweet, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in months. They talked briefly about the weather, the early leaf fall, the quietness of Sierra Grove. Evan noticed, however, that beneath their kindness lay tension. Walter's eyes drifted often toward the edge of the orchard. June's fingers twisted together when she thought Evan wasn't looking. As they parted, Evan caught sight of something that didn't belong. Near the wooden fence bordering the orchard, the soil was disturbed. Deep tire impressions pressed into the earth, heavy enough to leave scars. The fence itself leaned slightly, one post cracked at the base. Not old damage. Recent. Deliberate. Later that day, Evan stopped by the small town market for supplies. Inside, the mood was subdued. Conversations dropped when he entered, then resumed in hushed tones. He overheard fragments as he passed between aisles. Thornwell Development? They've been buying up land fast. Whitmore Place is next, if they can scare him enough. No one spoke directly to him, but the message was clear. Something was wrong in Sierra Grove, and everyone knew it. Except, perhaps, those pretending not to. Back at the orchard, Ranger lowered his head and sniffed near the apple trees. His posture stiffened. He circled once, then returned to Evan, ears flattened. Evan knelt, brushing his hand through Ranger's thick fur. He recognized the behavior instantly. Gunpowder. Old, faint, but unmistakable. Someone had been here before. Someone armed. That night, the wind picked up. Leaves rattled against the cabin walls. Evan secured the doors and windows, more from instinct than fear. Ranger stood by the window, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the trees. Then he growled, low, controlled, dangerous. Evan reached for the light switch. Crash. The sound of shattering glass echoed from the direction of the Whitmore orchard. Ranger surged forward, barking once, sharp and urgent. Evan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, his pulse steady, his mind suddenly clear. Whatever peace he had come here to find would have to wait. The night air over the orchard was sharp and damp, carrying the bitter scent of crushed leaves and cold soil. Evan Mercer ran hard, boots cutting through rows of fallen apples. Ranger, a dark blur racing ahead of him. The German shepherd's muscles moved like coiled steel released, every stride purposeful, every breath controlled. The soft glow of a porch light flickered through the trees, and with it came raised voices, harsh, impatient, edged with cruelty. At the edge of the clearing, the scene snapped into focus. 3 men stood on the Whitmore's porch, their silhouettes ugly against the yellow light. They wore heavy jackets and work boots caked with mud, the kind meant to intimidate by presence alone. One of them, a thick-necked man with a scarred cheek, had his shoulder pressed against the door, blocking escape. Another held a stack of papers and a pen, thrusting them forward again and again. And at the center stood Logan Pike. Logan Pike was lean and wiry, his frame stretched tight over restless energy. His hair was dark and greasy, pulled back into a low knot, and his eyes were pale and sharp, the kind that never softened. A faded prison tattoo crept up his neck, half hidden by his collar. He moved with the confidence of someone who had learned long ago that fear was a currency, and he enjoyed spending it. "Sign it," Logan said, his voice calm in the way only practiced bullies could manage. "Nobody wants this to get messy." Walter Whitmore stood between Logan and his wife, shoulders trembling but spine unbent. His thin frame shook with effort, his hands clenched into fists that had long since lost their strength but not their resolve. "This land isn't for sale," Walter said, his voice hoarse. "You need to leave." Logan's mouth twisted into a smile that held no humor. "That's not how this works." Ranger moved first. With a sharp, guttural bark, the German shepherd launched himself forward, his weight slamming into the man holding the papers. The thug went down hard, breath bursting from his lungs as he crashed against the porch railing. The pen skittered across the wood and vanished into the dark. Chaos erupted. "What the—" one of the men shouted, stumbling back. Logan swore, stepping away instinctively as Ranger planted himself between the Whitmores and the attackers, teeth bared, body low, and vibrating with restrained violence. Logan recovered quickly. He always did. "Get them scared," he snapped at his remaining man. "I don't care how." Walter raised an arm, trying to shield June, but Logan stepped forward and struck him without hesitation. The slap echoed through the orchard, a sharp, humiliating sound. Walter staggered, barely catching himself against the doorframe. June cried out, rushing to her husband's side, tears streaking down her face. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just leave us alone." That was when Evan stepped into the light. He moved fast, his presence sudden and absolute, like a cold front tearing through warm air. Evan's face was calm, unreadable, his gray eyes locked on the men before him. Rain darkened his jacket, and his posture carried the quiet authority of someone who did not need to shout to be heard. "Step away," Evan said. The remaining thug turned, surprised, trying to size him up. He was bigger than Evan, broader in the shoulders, but slower, hesitant. Evan closed the distance in 2 strides. The fight was over almost before it began. Evan deflected the man's clumsy punch, twisted his arm, and drove him face first into the porch post with precise, controlled force. Bone met wood. The thug collapsed, groaning, unable to rise. Evan turned immediately to the man Ranger had knocked down, delivering a swift kick to the ribs that ended any thought of resistance. Logan backed away, eyes wide now, fury bleeding into something closer to fear. "This isn't over," Logan spat, retreating down the steps. "You hear me? You think this is done?" Evan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Logan disappeared into the trees, his footsteps retreating fast and uneven. From somewhere beyond the orchard came his voice one last time, carried on the cold air. "I'll be back, with people who'll make this whole town kneel." Silence fell heavy in his wake. Ranger's growl softened, his body relaxing as Evan placed a hand on his shoulder. The dog stayed alert, eyes tracking the darkness long after Logan was gone. Inside the house, the warmth felt fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. Evan closed the door and scanned the room out of habit. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them. A young man in a firefighter's uniform smiled out from nearly every frame, his arm slung around Walter and June, pride unmistakable in their eyes. "Michael," June said quietly, following Evan's gaze. She wiped her tears with trembling fingers. "Our son." Evan studied the photographs closely. Michael Whitmore was tall, broad-shouldered, with an open, fearless smile. The kind of man who ran toward danger because others couldn't. "He died last year," Walter said. "Wildfire. He stayed behind to help evacuate a family trapped on the ridge." Evan nodded slowly. He knew that look. He had seen it too many times, reflected in too many mirrors. June's voice was barely above a whisper. "They think this place is just land, but it's the last place Michael walked, the last place he laughed. We're not afraid of losing property. We're afraid of losing him again." Something in Evan's chest tightened. He saw his own memories reflected in theirs. Faces of teammates frozen in time, laughter caught forever in photographs that never aged. The guilt that whispered that he had survived when others hadn't. Evan straightened, his decision settling into place with absolute clarity. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Ranger lay, down near June's feet, his massive body a silent promise of protection. She rested her hand on his fur, drawing comfort from the steady warmth. Outside, the orchard stood scarred, but unbroken, apples scattered across the ground like fallen embers. The wind moved through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of Logan Pike's threats, but leaving behind the certainty that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Morning crept into Sierra Grove, wrapped in pale fog, the kind that softened edges and muffled sound. The mountains loomed as dark shapes beyond the trees, their peaks hidden, their silence heavy. Evan Mercer drove slowly along the narrow road, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near Ranger's collar in the back seat. The Whitmores sat quietly beside him. Walter staring straight ahead, June holding her husband's hand as if letting go might make everything unravel. The cabin stood where the forest thickened, its rough timber walls already familiar to Evan. He helped the couple inside, moving with calm efficiency. June noticed it immediately, the way he checked corners, windows, lines of sight, without panic, without drama. Ranger took position at the front door the moment it closed, lying down with his head up, eyes alert. He did not sleep. Evan brewed coffee, the simple ritual grounding all of them. Walter tried to protest, insisting they would be safer back home, but Evan's voice was firm without being unkind. "For now, this is better," he said. "No open ground, fewer angles." Ranger's ears flicked at every sound outside, the snap of a branch, the distant call of a bird. He shifted only once, placing his body squarely between the door and the Whitmores' chairs, a silent wall of muscle and instinct. June watched him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I've never seen a dog like that," she murmured. Evan allowed himself a small, brief smile. "Neither has anyone who meant harm." While the Whitmores rested, Evan stepped outside. The fog was thinning, revealing slopes and tree lines in uneven layers. He walked the perimeter, boots crunching softly on damp leaves, his mind already moving. Logan Pike's threats were empty, only on the surface. Men like Logan never worked alone. Inside, Evan opened his laptop and a battered notebook he always carried. Thornwell Development appeared clean at first glance. Public filings, glossy brochures, promises of jobs and progress. But Evan had learned long ago that real intentions lived beneath surfaces. He followed threads quietly, patiently. The name Garrick Thorne surfaced again and again. Garrick Thorne was the CEO of Thornwell Development, a man in his early 50s with perfectly styled silver-streaked hair and a reputation for charm. His photographs showed tailored suits, confident smiles, and eyes that never quite reached warmth. Publicly, he spoke of sustainable growth. Privately, his financial trails curved and vanished into places they shouldn't. Evan traced connections, shell companies, offshore accounts, art dealers with criminal records. One name repeated in seized court documents from a case years ago, an antiquities smuggling ring operating along the West Coast. Thorne had never been charged. He had never been close enough to touch. By noon, Evan had enough to understand the shape of the threat. The Whitmore land sat above a natural fissure in the rock, a narrow path leading down to a concealed tidal shelf. At low tide, the water receded just enough to reveal a sheltered cove hidden from the main valley. Evan hiked to the ridgeline to see it for himself. From above, the land looked harmless. Golden leaves, rolling ground, apple trees bending under their own weight. From the cliff's edge, the truth revealed itself. Below lay a shadowed inlet, stone walls curving inward like a waiting mouth. Boats could slip in unseen. Cargo could vanish into tunnels carved through ancient rock. No resort developer needed something like this. Logan Pike had never mattered. He was noise, a scare tactic, the kind of man hired to push old people until they broke. The real plan lived deeper. By afternoon, Evan drove into town. Sierra Grove's main street was little more than a strip of weathered storefronts and parked trucks. The scent of sawdust and coffee hung in the air. He stopped near a workshop where the sound of hammer on wood rang clear and steady. Inside, a woman stood over a workbench, sleeves rolled up, forearms dusted with sawdust. Maeve Carter was in her late 20s, tall and strong, with auburn hair pulled into a messy braid. Her face was freckled lightly by the sun, her green eyes sharp and assessing. She moved with confidence, every motion economical and practiced. She looked up as Evan entered, her gaze immediately wary. "Shop's not open," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "And if you're here about selling land, save your breath." "I'm not," Evan replied simply. Maeve studied him a moment longer. "You're not from around here." Before Evan could answer, Ranger padded in behind him. The dog paused, sniffed the air, and then, to Evan's surprise, walked straight to Maeve and gently licked her hand. Maeve blinked, then laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Well, I guess that settles it." She crouched, scratching Ranger behind the ears without fear. "You don't do that with strangers, do you?" Evan shook his head. "Not usually." Maeve straightened, her expression softer now, but still cautious. She listened as Evan spoke of the Whitmores. Not details, just concern. Her jaw tightened at the mention of Logan Pike. "Figures," she said. "He's been flashing cash lately, buying drinks, paying people off, none of it local money." She leaned against the bench, arms crossed. Michael wouldn't have stood for this. The name landed between them. "You knew him," Evan said. Maeve nodded. "Everyone did. Firefighter. Brave to a fault." Her voice wavered just slightly. "He saved my brother once. Pulled him out of a burning shed like it was nothing." Evan felt the weight of it settle deeper. Another good man. Another empty space. Maeve looked at him again, really looked this time. "You didn't come here to rest." "No," Evan admitted. "I came here because I didn't know where else to go." She smiled faintly. "Then you picked the wrong place?" That evening, Evan returned to the cabin. The Whitmores were safer for now. Ranger still hadn't slept, his vigilance unbroken. Evan stood on the ridge as the sun sank behind the mountains, casting the valley in amber and shadow. The leaves glowed like embers below him. This was no longer an escape. It was a line being drawn. Fog rolled in from the ravine as night settled over Sierra Grove, thick and restless, pushed by sudden gusts that bent the apple trees until their branches creaked. Leaves tore loose and skittered across the ground like frightened animals. The sky vanished behind low clouds, and the moon became nothing more than a pale blur. It was the kind of night that swallowed sound and hid intention. Evan Mercer stood near the old barn at the edge of the Whitmore property, breath slow, movements deliberate. The barn was weathered but solid, its interior a maze of shadows, beams, and stacked crates. He had chosen this ground carefully. Lights were off across the property, windows dark, the orchard left to the wind. Ranger moved at his side, silent, ears pivoting with every shift in the air. They arrived without engines. Dark shapes slipped through the trees, boots barely disturbing the leaves. The men moved in pairs, spacing precise, rifles fitted with suppressors held close to their chests. Their clothing was matte black and gray, faces masked, posture disciplined. These were not the men Logan Pike usually hired. These were professionals, trained, methodical, confident. Evan felt the shift instantly, the pressure, the intent. He waited. A faint click echoed near the barn door. Metal brushing metal. Evan raised his hand, signaling Ranger to stay. A shadow crossed the open ground, then another. The mercenaries were probing, testing reactions. They expected panic. They expected chaos. They found neither. Evan triggered the first distraction with a measured pull of wire. A stack of empty barrels toppled inside the barn, crashing loudly. 2 mercenaries broke formation and advanced, weapons raised. Evan moved from behind, his approach masked by the wind. He struck fast and clean. One arm twisted, a pressure point hit, a knee buckling. The man collapsed, stunned but alive. The second turned, too late. Evan disarmed him and drove him to the ground, zip ties snapping tight around his wrists. A suppressed shot cracked nearby, tearing bark from a tree. Evan rolled, vanished into shadow. He cut power to the remaining floodlights with a practiced motion. Darkness swallowed the field. Rangers surged forward at Evan's silent command. A figure darted between the apple rows, moving low. June Whitmore stepped out of the barn doorway at the wrong moment, her silhouette exposed against the interior light. A mercenary lunged from behind a tree, arm raised. Ranger hit him mid-stride. The German shepherd's weight slammed into the attacker, jaws locking onto the padded forearm. The man screamed, the sound short and sharp before Evan reached them, striking with controlled force that dropped the mercenary instantly. Ranger released on command and positioned himself between June and the darkness, body taut, eyes blazing. "Stay inside," Evan said calmly. June nodded, shaken but upright, gripping the doorframe as Ranger backed her into safety. More figures moved now, 4, maybe 5, trying to circle the barn. Evan changed angles, appearing where none expected, striking from behind cover, from above, from silence. Each encounter ended the same way, a weapon removed, a body down, breathing intact. He left them bound and disoriented, unable to coordinate. Then tires roared. Headlights burst through the fog at the far edge of the orchard, sweeping low across the ground. A battered blue pickup truck skidded sideways, blocking the dirt access road with a screech of brakes. The driver's door flew open. Maeve Carter jumped out. She wore a heavy jacket over work clothes, auburn hair pulled tight, eyes fierce and focused. She didn't hesitate, grabbing a heavy tool from the truck bed, a worn fireman's hammer, its handle darkened by age and use. She held it like a promise. "Thought you could use this," she called, tossing the hammer toward Evan. He caught it without looking. Somewhere beyond the barn, Logan Pike watched the scene unravel. His plan had been simple: overwhelm, intimidate, force compliance. Instead, he saw his hired muscle falling one by one, the darkness itself turning against them. Rage twisted his face, desperation close behind. He moved fast. June Whitmore had stepped back outside, calling Walter's name in the confusion. Logan seized the moment, grabbing her from behind, arm locked around her chest, a handgun pressed hard against her side. "Back!" Logan shouted, dragging her toward the tree line. "Everyone back or she dies!" Evan froze, the hammer slipping from his grip. Ranger growled, low and lethal, muscles coiled, eyes locked on Logan. Maeve swore under her breath, taking a step forward before Evan raised a hand. Logan's face was wild now, sweat shining on his forehead, breath ragged. He backed into the forest, pulling June with him, branches snapping as he went. "Tell your friends," Logan yelled, his voice breaking as he disappeared into the fog. "I get what I want, one way or another." The night swallowed him whole. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the wind and the labored breathing of the men on the ground. Town lights flickered on in the distance as neighbors began to stir, some stepping onto porches, others watching from behind curtains. Fear and resolve mixed in the air. Maeve stood beside Evan, knuckles white around the hammer. "They won't stop," she said quietly. Evan watched the forest where Logan had vanished, jaw set, eyes steady. "No," he replied, "but neither will we." Ranger sat at his side, alert, unwavering, the fog curling around them like a held breath. Moonlight sifted through the high canopy in broken shards, turning the forest floor into a mosaic of silver and deep red. Fallen leaves crunched under hurried steps as Evan Mercer moved through the trees, breath steady, senses narrowed to a single thread. Ahead, branches snapped and swayed. Somewhere in that darkness, Logan Pike dragged June Whitmore deeper into the woods. The forest was alive with sound. Wind in the needles, the distant rush of water below the ravine. But Evan filtered it all away. He tracked by rhythm and disruption, by the uneven cadence of panic. Ranger flowed beside him without a sound, shoulders rolling, nose low, a growl vibrating deep in his chest like a coiled engine. They reached a small clearing where moonlight pooled bright enough to erase the fog. Logan stood there, trembling, one arm locked around June's shoulders. His handgun shook as he pressed it against her ribs. His face, slick with sweat, had lost its swagger. Fear had hollowed it out. "Don't come closer," Logan rasped. "I swear. One step and I pull the trigger." June's breath hitched, but she did not scream. Her chin lifted with a dignity that cut through the moment like steel. She stared ahead, eyes shining, refusing to collapse into terror. Evan stopped at the edge of the light. He did not raise his weapon. He let his hands hang loose at his sides, palms open, posture calm. Ranger halted beside him, muscles bunched, eyes locked on Logan, the growl deepening but never breaking. "You don't want this," Evan said quietly. "It ends bad for you." Logan laughed, a cracked, desperate sound. "It already has. He promised me protection. He promised money. He promised—" His voice faltered, rage dissolving into panic. They all lied. Evan took a slow step forward, boots whispering against leaves. Logan flinched, tightening his grip. June winced, but stayed upright. "Put the gun down," Evan said. "Walk away. You'll live." Logan's eyes darted to Ranger, then back to Evan. The gun wavered. The tremor in his hand grew worse. He was losing control. Of the weapon. Of himself. Evan saw the moment crest and break. That was the sign. "Ranger now!" The German Shepherd exploded into motion, a blur of black and tan cutting through the moonlight. Logan barely had time to gasp before Ranger struck, jaws clamping onto Logan's forearm with controlled force. The gun flew free, skittering across stone. Logan screamed as he went down hard, Ranger pinning him without killing intent, weight and precision locking the man to the ground. Evan was there in a heartbeat, pulling June clear, turning her gently away. He secured Logan with swift, practiced movements, binding his wrists and forcing the fight out of him. Ranger released on command and stepped back, chest heaving, eyes never leaving Logan. June steadied herself, one hand pressed to her heart. Then she broke, falling into Evan's arms with a sob that shook her thin frame. He held her until the sound eased, until her breath found its rhythm again. "Walter," she whispered, "I need to see Walter." Sirens wailed in the distance, rising and falling through the trees. Headlights cut between trunks as vehicles approached. Maeve Carter emerged from the shadows moments later, face pale but resolute, her jacket streaked with mud. She took in the scene. "June's safe," Logan restrained, Ranger standing guard, and exhaled hard. "You did it?" she said softly. "We did," Evan replied. By dawn, Sierra Grove was awake in a way it hadn't been for years. Agents from the FBI moved with brisk efficiency across the Whitmore property and beyond. Evidence boxes lined the dirt road, radios crackled. Men in dark jackets spoke in clipped tones as they cataloged weapons, seized documents, and photographed the hidden inlet below the ridge. Garrick Thorne was escorted from a black SUV in handcuffs, his tailored suit rumpled, his polished confidence gone. His eyes flicked toward the forest once, calculating, bitter, before he was guided away. The arrests unfolded quickly after that. With the hardware Maeve had helped recover, encrypted drives, transaction ledgers, shipping logs. The case solidified into iron. The antiquities network collapsed inward, exposing routes, buyers, and silent partners who had believed themselves untouchable. Walter Whitmore found June near the orchard at first light. He crossed the grass as fast as his legs would carry him and pulled her into his arms. They clung to each other, tears soaking flannel and wool, grief and relief pouring out together. Ranger sat close, a quiet sentinel, while Evan stepped back to give them space. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened. The sentences came down in a federal courtroom far from Sierra Grove, but the echoes reached the valley all the same. Garrick Thorne received 27 years in federal prison for antiquities smuggling, coercion, and the use of hired mercenaries. Logan Pike was sentenced to 18 years for assault, kidnapping, and destruction of property. 3 mercenaries drew terms ranging from 10 to 15 years, each according to their role. Thornwell Development shuttered its California operations, assets seized and audited under court order. The Whitmore Farm was declared a generational agricultural heritage site, protected by statute, immune to future seizure. The apple trees stood where they always had, leaves blazing gold under the late-season sun. On a clear afternoon, Evan and Maeve stood among those trees. Ranger chased a flurry of dry leaves, bounding with unrestrained joy, the season's colors clinging briefly to his fur before scattering again. Maeve held Michael's hammer loosely at her side, then pressed it into Evan's hands. "He would have been proud," she said, voice steady, "of what you did, of who you are." Evan swallowed, feeling the old weight finally ease. "I think," he said after a moment, "I'm going to stay." Maeve smiled. "Sierra Grove could use someone like you." The festival arrived with the last warmth of the year. Strings of lights, tables of cider and pie, laughter threading through the air. Evan walked beside Maeve through the crowd, Ranger weaving happily between children. Above them, leaves drifted down in slow, unbroken arcs, catching the light like blessings. Autumn did not yield. It endured. This story is not just about courage in the face of danger. It is about the quiet strength of ordinary people who refuse to be pushed aside, the loyalty that stands watch when the world turns dark, and the choice to protect what truly matters, even when it costs comfort or peace. In everyday life, we may never face armed men in the forest, but we all face moments when fear tries to take something from us: our dignity, our memories, our home, or our loved ones. This story reminds us that standing firm, asking for help, and choosing to protect others can change everything. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it simply stays. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not alone. Let us know in the comments what moment touched you the most, or which character you connected with. And if you believe in stories of resilience, loyalty, and hope, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for being part of this journey.